Good morning, everybody. My name is EdSpiezioRunyon. Today I'm presenting on a new GIS-based approach to performing Martian subspace I knew I was going to do that. Martian subsurface analysis. Um, Before diving into this, though, I want to give a sincere thanks to my husband, Jamie EdSpiezioRunyon, for his encouragement, but especially for his tireless help with the Python coding. I am not a coder by background. His support was absolutely essential in getting the data processing and automation up and running. And I can honestly say this analysis would quite literally not be possible without him in this time period. Uh, Over the past 4 months, I have applied geospatial analysis, machine learning, and radar science to build what I believe to be the first planet-wide GIS-based interpretation of subsurface reflectors from ESA's Mars's radar aboard the Mars Express orbiter. The work itself is technical, but its implications are scientific, they're exploratory, and they're strategic. So this actually supports our understanding of water on Mars and offers tools that may help to guide future missions. So Mars once had rivers, lakes, and possibly oceans, but today any remaining water is hidden deep underground. Finding it matters for science, like understanding Mars's history and habitability, and for future human missions that depend on water for things like fuel and life support. I used Marsus radar to search below the surface. Now, Marsus is an instrument aboard the ESA's Mars Express orbiter that sees deep underground, which is about 5 kilometers below the surface. While SHARED, the instrument on NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, sees shallow layers of around 1 kilometer, but with more detail. I used SHARED as a check to validate my findings. Up to this point, there hasn't been a GIS-based planetary analysis of Mars's data, and most studies were either done locally or manually. And no one had clustered all of the strongest reflectors, checking to see if they formed large networks or validated them statistically, and that's what this project does. So this study had 4 main goals. First, I pre-processed and filtered the data to the 95th percentile in terms of signal strength. Next, I clustered them using dbScan and k-means, both spatially and by attributes like depth and signal strength. And then I applied statistics or spatial statistics, including Moran's I and Geary's C for global autocorrelation, and the Geddes or GI star for hotspot detection, and Ripley's K to check for connectivity. And then finally, I built 3D visualizations and validated the clusters against SHARED's confirmed ice zones. I began with a full global Marsus data set, which was over 250 billion individual radar returns. I removed atmospheric and ground interference with noise suppression using cluttergrams and DEM filtering, and that left me with about 35 billion subsurface reflectors. And then I filtered for radar power values, retaining the top 5%, the 1.5 billion brightest echoes, as these represent the high contrast interfaces, which could possibly be ice, brine, or rock boundaries. I normalized radar power and reflector depth and divided the planet into 72 GIS-aligned tiles for processing. I did that by 10-degree longitudinal increments and a 90-degree latitudinal increment. And this allowed me to run both GPU-accelerated and spatially aware analyses that hadn't really been feasible before. As an aside, this picture on the left here is the orbital track that I've mapped. Using the 1.5 billion reflectors, I actually sampled every 200 reflectors for every orbit of the 8,811 orbits, and then mapped those as vectors to actually get a view of how covered the planet had been by the Marsus instrument. Turned out the entire planet had fallen within the swath of the orbiter at some point, save for about 270-kilometer diameter, just directly above the poles. It is in a near orbit, so it never quite goes above or never views above about 87 degrees north or south. On the right is a little bit of the process that I actually went through to break this down. The top image is the raw image that comes from the ESA, or from, in this particular case, the storage was at the Washington University in St. Louis. All of the data was actually stored in that file, in an actual image file. So big part of this process was, first of all, those are two separate channels at the top. Big part of the process was actually automating, splitting those into two separate channels, which would then result into this single channel. This is actually a Mars orbiter MOLA image, which actually, if you see right in the center here, the black line is the nadir for the pass. Then I have a cluttergram, which actually takes what the actual surface is, combine these two, and I was able to then filter it down to be able to get just the subsurface with a couple of little outlier noise pieces that just needed to be filtered out based on the surface itself. That was before I could even start any analysis. That was just 8,800. Imagine that. Imagine doing that exact process 16,000 times before you could start the process. It was a fun challenge on that one. So my first method of analysis, though, came down to spatial clustering. I used DBScan to detect spatial clusters of strong reflectors, since it's ideal for geological data because it handles irregular, non-circular groupings like subsurface ice lenses or buried glaciers in this case. Of the 1.5 billion points that I studied, more than 424 million actually formed into clusters. So almost a third of the strong points were clustered. I merged them into nearby clusters and focused on the 35 most significant based on size, depth, consistency, and signal strength. And these clusters showed tight depth bands and coherent regional patterns that suggest they're tied to real material boundaries in the crust. The map on the right here, the top is represents the known finds from Sharid and previous studies, which are color-coded by region. So I have the mid-latitude regions in the north and the south that run between about 30 to 60 degrees. I have Utopia Planitia here. I have Arcadia Planitia here, which crosses across the boundary here. The purplish up at the top here is Vestitus Borealis, and the North Polar layered deposits are the orange or peachish maybe on top of that. And then down at the bottom are the South Polar layered deposits. I point that out because I will be using this map as an underlay in the other images throughout the presentation without the individual color coding as in this cluster map below. As you can see, this cluster map actually shows these clusters cover pretty much the entire range of longitudes and latitudes across the planet. My second method was using an attribute-based clustering. I used k-means clustering and group reflectors not by location, but by similarity in radar signal strength and depth. And this uncovered 244 attribute-based clusters. Some were very shallow and high-powered, which would likely be clean ice based on the research that I've done with other studies. Others were deeper and less reflective, which could possibly indicate brine-soaked settlement or basal layers in the rock. Again, this scan does go down to roughly 5 kilometers in depth. And actually the deepest that I saw was, or the deepest point that I saw was 4,880 meters below the surface. So this analysis confirmed that different radar signatures exist across Mars and supports the idea of a vertical subsurface stratification. And as you can see in this image, these clusters almost perfectly follow the mid-latitude bands. The third method was a spatial autocorrelation. I used Moran's I and Geary's C to test whether reflectors were statistically clustered across space. For Moran's I values, -1 equals perfect dispersion, 0 is randomness, and 1 is strong clustering. My values averaged around 0.76, indicating a strong tendency toward clusters. And the depth was 0.9. Again, very strong tendency toward clustering at that point. Geary's C is more sensitive to local differences. On its scale, numbers less than 1 equate to clustering of similar values, while numbers greater than 1 show a checkerboard dispersion. My values showed local coherence with an average of about 0.24 for power and 0.07 for depth, also indicating very, very strong clustering. These tests confirmed that what I saw with DBScan and k-means wasn't just some artifact of my study. The completely different tests show that these reflectors really do cluster. They're statistic, and the cluster, they cluster statistically and geophysically. The fourth method was hotspot analysis. So I ran the GEDIS or GI star hotspot analysis to detect statistically significant clusters of high radar power. I found tens of thousands of statistically significant hotspots of very high radar reflection intensity, including one zone that had more than 23,000 high-value hotspots. These were typically concentrated in the mid-latitudes, especially in areas like Arcadia Planitia, which again would be in the northern band there, and in the polar layered deposits. These maps show partitions where reflectors are most statistically intense, and they help to focus attention on areas with the best potential for ice or brine resources. The fifth method was connectivity. So I used Ripley's K to test for spatial dependence at various distances, ranging from 1 to 10 kilometers. I identified 10,025 cluster chains that crossed partition boundaries, which suggests regional scale continuity well beyond the identified zones. In fact, the chains that I found ran anywhere from crossing 2 points to or across one set of boundaries to more than 1,100 points crossing over 100 kilometers. The results showed statistically significant cluster chains well beyond local scales. And this connectivity indicates that these reflectors may be part of larger geological units like regional ice sheets or subsurface aquifers. And with that, I'd like to show you method 6 and a view of Mars that I guarantee you've never seen before. I built full 3D visualization of the radar reflectors overlaid on Mars's topography. Here on the left, we can see Mars's western hemisphere with Olympus Mons up here, and this is the Valles Marineris, which is the huge deep chasm that's visible from space. And the eastern hemisphere is on the right. Purple points in these images represent the strongest radar echoes, and you can see bands of clustering along the mid-latitude regions, both in the north and the south, between 30 and 60 degrees north and south, which is exactly where ground ice is predicted to be stable today. The mosaic actually lets us visually interpret the depth, the strength, and the geographic location of subsurface structures on a global scale. But as you look at these images, I think it's important to remember the weakest signals shown here as yellows are still among the top 5% of radar reflectors across the entire planet, which could suggest that water in some form or another could be far more ubiquitous across the planet than we've imagined. So Utopia Planitia is one of the clearest and most consistent shallow reflector clusters. Radar power is very high and depth is right around 150 meters below ground. And you can see here we have Utopia Planitia is a huge area, stretching more than 2,000 kilometers in diameter. But it is showing very high purple signal return here. This matches prior shard studies that confirm subsurface ice here, and this makes Utopia a strong candidate for future exploration, both scientifically and for resource extraction. Arcadia Planitia, which is a few thousand kilometers to the west or east, depending on which way you want to look at it, of Utopia Planitia, is also in the northern mid-latitudes, showed dense reflectors at moderate depths, and this area would be all throughout here. Again, we have the strong purple response. But these are at moderate depths of about 1.5 kilometers. They have lower radar power, but form the cohesive clusters, and their distribution and depth align with models of long buried glacial deposits beneath dry sediment layers. The northern polar layered deposits, and which would be in this region here, and Vestitis borealis, which kind of expands just a little bit beyond that. I observed vertically stacked radar reflectors that matched matched known internal polar layering. These reflectors actually form narrow bands at different depths, consistent with alternating layers of dust and ice. So this case reinforces the accuracy of the pipeline. The methods used allow us to see structures that were already well documented by previous missions, and ultimately means this region is likely very ice rich. And then the solar polar layer deposits, I found radar reflectors nearly 5 kilometers deep, which were the deepest in the entire data set. These might represent the base of a polar ice cap, or it could possibly be briny liquids layers beneath the ice. This result actually pushes the limits of what MARSIS can detect and offers a good target for future study. And as you can see in this image and the previous one, there is about the 270 kilometer diameter gap in coverage above the 87th parallel. So this slide really brings it all together. Every measure technique applied agreed and pointed toward the exact same high priority zones. So you can see that visually in the infographic here, each method contributes a distinct line of evidence. DB-scan found dense spatial clusters. KB means grouped reflectors by power and depth, showing stratified subsurface layers. Moran's I and Geary's C confirmed that reflectors cluster far more than by random chance. GI star identified tens of thousands of statistically intense hotspots, again, more than 23,000 in just one zone. Ripley's K revealed long-range connectivity that reflectors aren't just isolated points, but are part of larger structures that cross partition boundaries across long distances. And the 3D visualizations made these structures visible on a global scale, and you're able to see connectivity between the different partitions. And finally, that little radar echo icon with the green check mark represents validation from Shard. Confirms that many of the strongest reflectors align with known subsurface ice zones. So together, these independent methods converge on the same regions, Utopia Planitia, Arcadia, mid-latitude regions, and the polar layer deposits. And this convergence gives very high confidence that what we're seeing here isn't noise, it's real, it's mappable, and it's geologically meaningful structure. But most importantly, and probably most excitingly to me, is these structures, these results identified very intense clustered signals in areas that have never been closely examined before, bringing with them the possibility for entirely new discoveries. So in conclusion here, I built a planet-wide GIS integrated interpretation pipeline for Mars radar data. Still blows my mind. This allowed me to statistically map and validate potential subsurface ice deposits at a global scale. Next steps for something like this to continue this sort of research could be to calculate dielectric constants to estimate material types, merge with geological or mineralogical data sets, and apply the same workflow to icy moons like Europa and Enceladus, or even to the moon or Earth analogs like in Antarctica. So again, I would like to acknowledge and thank my husband, Jamie, for his Python coding and encouragement, as well as Dr. Krogauker and Dr. Lukenbiel for their support and indulging me in this absolutely insane venture, and to Dr. William Blewett for his guidance and mentorship. And I would like to thank you for your attention. I'd be happy to answer any questions, whether about the data or GIS methods or what this means for Mars science and exploration.